Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Full Picture Podcast by Pictures Up Productions. I'm your host, Sam Morgan. For today's episode, we'll be taking a trip to the side of Hollywood they don't want you to know about. In the last few years, previously hidden information has come out regarding the entertainment industry and the extent to which it's influenced by governmental agencies. Today, we'll be talking to one of the people who helped break that story. Dr. Roger Stahl is one of the world's leading experts on the military entertainment complex. His most recent documentary film, Theaters of War, exposed a decades-long collaboration between the Pentagon and Hollywood. He and his colleagues have uncovered tens of thousands of documents on thousands of media productions secretly influenced by the Department of Defense. Or Department of War, I guess. I interviewed Dr. Stahl about a month ago for a video essay I was working on for my YouTube channel, Pictures Up Productions, which you can go watch now. But if you want to hear our full conversation, you're in the right place. This episode, as you might be able to guess, will contain plenty of discussion of war. This will include some discussion of some pretty heinous war crimes and mass death, as well as some brief references to sexual assault. So if any of those topics are particularly sensitive for you, please feel free to sit this one out. Without any further ado, here's the interview. Hi everyone, Sam here. I'm joined for this interview by Dr. Roger Stahl, author of Militainment Incorporated and Through the Crosshairs, producer of the documentaries Militainment Incorporated, Through the Crosshairs, and Theaters of War, and a professor of communication studies here at the University of Georgia's Franklin College of Arts and Sciences. Even though he's a Franklin guy and I'm a Grady guy, I'm pleased to say that one of the most prominent scholars of the military entertainment complex is a professor at my university. Dr. Roger Stahl, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Good to be at the university with you.
I'm glad to hear it. Well, we've got quite a lot of ground to cover with this military entertainment thing, so what do you say we go ahead and hit the ground running?
Sure, let's do it.
All right. First off, I hate to ask you to distill years of research into such a short description, but if you only had a couple of sentences to describe what the military entertainment complex is to someone who had just never heard of it, what would you say?
What the military entertainment complex is? Well, it's two words kind of slammed together that most people would recognize the military-industrial complex as the sort of like factory system as it relates to the Department of Defense. Military entertainment complex is kind of like that, but consider, the factory system that is the entertainment industry being a kind of handmaiden, a public relations and propaganda handmaiden to the Department of Defense. And you have a pretty good idea of what we mean by militainment and the military entertainment complex.
Mm-hmm. So having explained this concept briefly to a few people now, I've found it's somewhat common for people to know that the Pentagon has collaborated with some Hollywood productions, which that's good. They tend to know about Top Gun. Maybe they're aware of the various Marvel projects, if anything. But what not many people know is just how pervasive and how secretive the military entertainment complex actually is. Can you maybe try and provide us with some perspective on sort of the scale and the scope and the depth of the issue?
Okay. Well, I would say it's not secret in the sense that we know of its existence. We don't know everything about exactly how it conducts its internal operations. And we haven't known that until about 5 years ago when we got our hands on a lot of documentation that shows us exactly what's going on. So it hasn't been a secret in terms of its knowledge of its existence and the fact that they do this kind of work. But we really didn't know the kind of range and scope and the things you're talking about in detail. So if you go through all the documents that we have, which is about 60,000 pages over the last 50 years or something like that, with details about cooperation and influence over 300 to 500 films, we know that this is a pervasive kind of operation. If you count up everything that we can confirm, and that includes like reality TV, video games, news broadcasts, films, and television series, then we're up to about 2,500 productions that the DoD has had a contractual relationship with and has had editorial control over the script. And that doesn't count all the kind of informal influence that they've had. If you count up all of the episodes of all the series that they've worked in, then the number is into the, high thousands, probably almost 10,000 confirmed projects that they've worked on or have an influence over.
Wow. Yeah, so really just an incredible number of projects. So all of this begs the question, if film studios, TV networks, and corporate news media are so willing to bend the knee and serve the Pentagon's strategic messaging objectives, is there really a meaningful difference between the products of the military entertainment complex and traditional propaganda as we usually think of it?
I mean, when you say the word propaganda, you usually think of like public service announcements or newsreels or posters, the kind of old style propaganda that people recognize from World War I and World War II, and it's very heavy-handed. You recognize it right away. We're talking about something completely different, which is a kind of like Trojan horse that has been smuggled into Hollywood and the entertainment industry. So most people can sense, I suppose, when they watch something like Top Gun or Top Gun Maverick, that the military played some role in allowing them to use those tools to make the film. But they probably wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what that means. They wouldn't be able to tell you, for example, that means that the filmmakers hand over the script and they go through several iterations and several passes before that machinery can be handed over for the filmmakers to use on screen. So, the level and the depth of influence is something that most people just have no clue about, even though they sense that there may be some cooperation involved.
Right. So now that we understand that the Pentagon and the CIA play a much greater role in our entertainment landscape than most people assume, I think before we get in depth about how exactly that works, we should discuss what this propaganda usually looks like, or what this material usually looks like from a rhetorical point of view. So this is how we arrive at the concepts of the spectacular war and the interactive war from Militainment Incorporated. Could you characterize those concepts for us?
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the DoD and its relationship to Hollywood necessarily. It's much broader than that.
Right.
Those are modes of relating to conflict that have persisted over time. So since Vietnam, and especially as you get to the early 1990s, you have a period, and it's defined by the first Gulf War in 1990 and 1991, of a kind of relationship to the television screen that is sort of a lean back, regard the war as kind of a show of pretty lights and spectacular weaponry. And so I call that spectacular war. And that's in distinction to the kind of experience that most of us had in 2003, and you're probably too young to have experienced this or remember this. But there was a kind of invitation to lean forward and play the war. So the video game is the kind of metaphor by which we sort of understood it. And there were Gulf War themed video games all over the place suddenly, but also there were Gulf War themed reality shows that were sort of disguised as news, right? So there's this invitation for the viewer to kind of project themselves onto the screen in the form of an avatar or a news reporter who is dressed up like a soldier in the embedded reporting system, and just kind of envision ourselves on the battlefield in a kind of, I describe it in the book as kind of the mode of safe danger, right? We're separated by the screen, but we get to kind of play a little bit too.
Right.
That's the interactive mode.
And someone you quote in Militainment Incorporated, Robin Anderson, in her book, A Century of Media, she argues that meaningful civic engagement has been replaced somewhat by the illusion of interactivity. Is that kind of how, would you agree that that's sort of what's happened?
Yeah, it's the same argument I make in Militainment Inc. about the interactive war. Real civic interaction with conflict means, understanding that as citizens, we're pulling the trigger. We're authorizing the conflict because we have a civilian-controlled military, just like a lot of other democracies, right? The president who makes these decisions has to have the will of Congress and the authorization of Congress, and that requires a civic authorization, right? And the president, him or herself, is a civilian, not a military person, right, and is elected leader. So we have civilian control of the military. That means the decision has to have legitimacy among the people who voted these officers into office.
Right.
That's real meaningful civic deliberation, when we're taking that seriously. We're not taking it seriously in the form of the interactive war. We're asked to play the conflict and dress up as soldier or commit to the screen as an avatar of some kind, right? That's projecting yourself into the boots of somebody who's taking orders, not somebody who's giving them, right? And so that's giving up civic deliberation, and that is a kind of abdication of the solemn role of the citizen in wartime, which is, in a democracy at least, is to make that hard decision about whether this is worth it.
Your book and documentary Through the Crosshairs trace what you call the weaponized gaze through the history of American media. What is the weaponized gaze, and how does it serve our broader sort of new conception of war by informing our perception of wartime narratives, whether that's in movies, TV news, or video games?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm so impressed that you read all this.
I've unfortunately only seen Through the Crosshairs, the documentary. I've read all of Militainment.
Yeah. Well, the weaponization of conflict has to do with the way we see it. And if you kind of start with World War II, especially during Vietnam, when some of these weapons with cameras in the nose cones start to get developed, then you start to see the kind of footage that we're really used to now, which is the weapons eye view. And so drones become, the kind of representative image of that. So the DoD curates a lot of drone footage and then selectively releases it, and it shows up on the news. So we become very used to watching, infrared bodies kind of skittering across the screen and exploding in great inky clouds of destruction. It sort of displaced our regular way of seeing conflict. And that's very selective, and it's very deliberate on the part of those who are releasing that footage, because it puts you in a position where you see war as sort of inevitable. The people are dehumanized. We don't see the aftermath of the destruction. You don't see little girls with smashed up faces. You're the furthest, the most distant and distanced from that kind of image as you possibly can be with the kind of image that we are fed to on a daily basis as part of our media diet now.
How has, this is a very broad question, but how has the military sort of collaborated with and played on the tropes of the video gaming industry to influence its public perception?
Well, the DoD involves itself in video games all the time. And you wouldn't think they'd need to do so because all that is CGI, right? But video game manufacturers, they want the kind of imprimatur of the DoD. They want the credibility that comes along with working with the DoD so they can use that in advertisements. And for some reason, people aren't as suspicious of that kind of connection as they are with films. And that's an interesting observation that I've made over the years, and I'm not sure I can explain why that is. But people aren't as suspicious about DoD cooperation with video games. And in fact, it becomes a kind of selling point when game makers come around to like talking about the realism of what they've produced. And the realism that they're after is a lot of sounds of weaponry, what it sounds like when you pull this kind of pin out of this grenade versus this other kind of grenade, the exact specs of any new weapons that might come on board and that the military maybe isn't even using yet. They want to put in games, and that's kind of how that relationship works. It's like, how close can you get to the military in order to reproduce in as high degree of verisimilitude as possible the weaponry that the end user eventually gets to play. So there's that. And then there is Hollywood. And you've noticed, you watch Zero Dark 30 or watch, I think the best example of this actually was 2012. The Navy pitched a film called Act of Valor to Hollywood, and they found producers to produce it, and it starred real Navy SEALs who are horrible actors, by the way. Bad idea. But they go on a mission, and it looks like a video game. The point of view of the camera is like first-person shooter through the whole thing. And it was a way of like selling the Navy SEALs. It started as a recruitment ad pitch, and then the Navy decided this should be a movie, so they went after Hollywood producers to produce it, and it was, it arrived at the movie theaters just like any other big blockbuster. But the aesthetics of that followed video games very closely. So, there's an advantage in doing that, of selling a war that looks like a first-person shooter, and that is you kind of extract the citizen from the equation, right? We don't ask the same questions when we're participating in a media event like that. We don't ask the questions about, is this conflict just? Should we have authorized it? Because it's in your face and going already. In fact, you've got to execute the plan and the operation and get out of there.
Or you die.
Right. Right. As whatever avatar that they've presented to you. So there's no opportunity to ask those questions. It doesn't call to mind those questions, and thus, it serves power.
Right. I think a similar example in the film world, the time I think, at least in my lifetime, that I've seen them boasting about their collaboration with the military had to have been Top Gun Maverick. Mm-hmm. That was when you go to research this now, half of the articles that come up are just about Top Gun Maverick or around that time, and it's a really interesting sort of mask-off moment, I guess, Top Gun Maverick, because they were very blatant and very honest about the fact that the Navy was involved in making the film. I suppose they didn't exactly advertise the fact that the Navy had editorial control.
That's
I guess
right.
That would be the biggest.
Yes,
they
were honest about that.
Right. It was Theaters of War actually that pointed out to me that that the mission that's accomplished in Top Gun Maverick is illegal. Yeah.
That's right. It's a bombing of a sovereign country that hasn't attacked the United States. What did the Trump administration just do? It conducted a series of Top Gun Maverick-style bomb campaigns on Iranian nuclear research sites that didn't even work. But Top Gun Maverick, it sort of paved the way for that and normalized that operation. It's a war crime.
Right.
It's illegal under the UN Charter. How many people did you hear asking questions about whether or not this was a legal activity? Zero.
Oh, absolutely.
In the United States. And that's just a reflection of how complete our media environment has been with regard to that kind of story.
Right. And it's just sort of the assumption of the moral high ground on part of the...
imagine if that was reversed.
Right.
We have nuclear research facilities here. Would it be okay with most of us if Iran were to make a movie about bombing them and then ship that around the world?
Right.
No, there'd probably be a few news stories about that, and a few think pieces, right? And most of the time, all you have to do is turn the tables on what's happening, and you get your answer about the sort of ethical relationship that the U.S. has, which is a relationship of exceptionalism to the rest of the world.
Right. In Militainment Incorporated, you name one of the goals of Militainment as sort of the removal of this citizen. We've already kind of touched on this, from a deliberative role in the war machine. How exactly would you define the deliberative role, and how do the spectacular and interactive war sort of serve to undermine it?
I could take another run at that one.
Right. I guess we could actually kind of skip it, I guess.
No.
Have the material I need.
It might be better, and you can cut this together however you want.
True. Right.
Well, the spectacular mode, it exempts the citizen. It says you're not necessary. All you have to do is watch. The war machine is going to go on without you. Enjoy the pretty lights. Enjoy the spectacular, show of it all. But don't participate. And in fact, just turn yourself off and be a couch potato. That's how it addresses us, right? Not as citizens, as people that authorize the conflict. You have to think about it. About whether it's just or not, but as bystanders to something that's already been decided. So that's the spectacular war. The interactive war kind of shoots you into the boots of the soldier, and that I don't know if you have military friends, but you ask them, do you think this war, whatever war we happen to be in, and we're always sort of around the world bombing somebody. Do you think it's just? And if they're active duty, they will say, it's not my place to decide that, right? It's my place to do my duty and take orders. Well, as citizens, if we're shuttled into the boots of a soldier, avatar or whatever it is, and that's where we're used to being, then we are going to we're going to still be interactive, right? Still play part in the conflict, but we're going to shut that deliberative kind of civic part of our brain off. It's going to be channeled into some other direction. It'll be channeled into the boots of the soldier. Right. And so that's why these two modes are so sort of insidious, right? They they take a deliberative role and they submerge it, and it becomes invisible after a while if these two modes are prevalent enough.
Right. A lot of Militainment Incorporated is about the news media's integration, quote unquote integration with the Pentagon's, to quote you, that is, with the Pentagon's official narratives, and how it allows the United States to sort of disseminate propaganda, so to speak, about various war efforts without adequate context. How did this happen, and why did corporate news media sacrifice balanced reporting with adequate context for more sensationalized coverage that has characteristics of Hollywood storytelling, and how did it become a form of militainment in itself?
Gosh, that's a long story. Okay. I probably have to go all the way back to Vietnam in order to tell this story.
That's all right.
If that's okay.
It all seems to start there a lot of the time.
It does, yeah. I mean, it's a huge pivot point. Vietnam didn't have controls over the press, in large part. The press were alarmingly, this isn't the story that most people tell in retrospect, government folks or news media folks, but alarmingly, the press largely went along with the official narrative and didn't really offer the kind of critique that we think in retrospect, or we remember that it did. I mean, there are a few moments where people like Dan Rather reported on the burning of a village and showed, people, soldiers with Zippo lighters lighting thatched roofs on fire, right? And that was a huge moment. Or, the Napalm Girl picture that, I don't want to stretch this out too far, but what scholars have found in retrospect is that a lot of the critical reporting that we think came out of Vietnam during the whole period really came right at the end, after public sentiment went south. So first the public gave the press permission to get critical, and then they got critical, and that's when we got all these critical images.
Do you see a parallel there, not to interrupt, but do you see a parallel there with the seeming media turn on Gaza right now?
Yeah, I mean, the press there's nothing in it for corporate media to tell a critical story, right? They lose viewers, they lose advertisers, they lose access to official sources that they need in order to keep the news flowing, right? And they're jeopardizing all that when they tell a critical story. If audience demand is big enough, right, then they will do that. But otherwise, the default mode is to play it safe, right? Because their responsibility is not news as a sort of objective understanding of what's going on in the world. It's to the next quarterly report and the shareholders, right, for NBC or whatever. So as news becomes more corporatized, those forces become stronger, and the will to play it safe becomes even more solidified. Mm-hmm. All right. You fast forward to 1991 and the Gulf War. Military and government officials see that they have an opportunity to control the press even further because they have this narrative from Vietnam that that reporters were off the leash and they compromised the mission. And so to the extent that people believe that, they're able to say, hey, we need to put controls into place. And what they did was implement the press pooling system, which kind of corralled all these reporters into these tent cities. And there was a couple of different ones, one in Saudi Arabia and one on the border, one in Qatar. And a few in Baghdad, actually, that broke the rules that they allowed to stay there, but they were cordoned off and they were controlled. There was a kind of central narrative coming out of these daily press conferences. So the reporters didn't see anything that the military didn't want them to see. They were in pens, essentially. And this is when CNN showed up, the news kept flowing, right? The press releases keep coming from official sources. So they, rather than let them kind of wander off and get the story, they kept them in pens and they kept feeding them the news. And that sort of sustained the relationship. And you can see why that made economic sense for journalism, that kind of journalism, corporate journalism. Fast forward again another decade. So we're in 2003, and they come up with another scheme. It's called the embedded reporting system. We're going to let these people ride along with us. So they dress them up in fatigues. They put them on tanks and Bradley armored vehicles or in a Chinook helicopter, and it's spectacular. The viewership is even more intense, more engaged, and the controls are even tighter. The leash is even shorter, right? Try telling a critical story when the guys and women that are fighting the war are sort of surrounding you in this vehicle, right? And don't want that story told because they are looking out for each other, right? Try telling that a critical story under those conditions. And so it's not just that your editor at home is saying, keep your mouth shut. It's that the people that are sitting next to you are telling you, you better play ball with us because you're on board on this mission. And we want this platoon or this squadron to look the best in the eyes of the public. So there's all these pressures on this reporter. And even if that person wanted to tell the story, show pictures of little kids, in pieces, those stories wouldn't get past their own self-censorship and their editors. And the filters just keep going on and on. So we got even more controlled news environment there, even though it looked like the reporters were even closer to the front lines.
And that's sort of the illusion of interactivity that we talked about almost, or sort of an illusion of understanding. And it's sort of counterintuitively to dim our understanding of things. We've been given more. It almost feels like, you know what I mean? We've been given these video games and these films and this news coverage, and we're seeing it more up close and personal than ever. At least that's how it looks. It's not really that they're hiding things from us. It's just that they're selectively showing us a lot of things and almost an overwhelming barrage of things. Yeah,
it's not so much censorship as it is crowding out alternative visions of what the war is. I mean, try to find pictures of victims. I mean, just try to find one during the Iraq War. I mean, we decimated that country. It's 23 million people. We killed at least a million. At least a million. Try to find one image of Iraqi civilians undergoing, the kind of thing that we see all the time coming out of Ukraine or other conflicts in which we are identifying with the victims. You can't find it. You just won't find it, and we didn't find it in that conflict.
Right. I notice you make a point in Militainment Incorporated to emphasize the role played by capitalism in the production of Militainment. To quote you here, the televised consumption of the spectacular war cannot be separated from larger trends in global U.S. power. The prime metaphor for war during this period migrated from defense of a geographical nation-state to security of a worldwide network of capital. Advertising moved from a secondary role of extolling the virtues of products to a primary role in consumer capitalism as a mechanism for creating so-called brand identities. I've read other sources, most notably by Tim Lenoir and Luke Caldwell, that argue capitalist profit motives play a greater role than direct collaboration with the government. How do you think that the blame there is most accurately distributed?
I mean, it's both, and I really appreciate Lenoir and Caldwell's take on that because they really do focus in on consumer capitalism and on corporate capitalism as the kind of main driver of this sort of thing. And, if you zoom out in the larger analysis, if you want to look at, government control over the news, if you look around and poke around long enough and follow the money, then you're going to eventually discover that, the forces that are acting on these governmental agencies that are then acting on the news are corporate forces, right? We got to protect shipping lanes. We got to protect the flow of oil. So you have major transnational companies that are lobbying our governmental system and putting more pressure on U.S. foreign policy than the people of the United States and calling the shots, really. So, in the end, even though we can zoom in and kind of look at this as government control over corporate news or something like that, which there is an analysis to be had there, and that's the one that I do. You zoom out and follow the money, and you see that the larger umbrella has to do with transnational corporate capital and its influence over all kinds of things, including how governments produce foreign policy.
All right. Well, lastly, on the point of rhetoric, how is dissent characterized in both sort of fictional and non-fictional presentations of the war effort? This is just the last section of.
Yeah. Well, usually it's invisible.
Right.
Okay, that's the first step. Just make it invisible. And I suppose we can talk about like corporate news as a good place to look. And you can look at, whether truly anti-war films show up in Hollywood. That'd be another version of dissent. And they occasionally do. I mean, I would say the latest Superman film, insofar as it...
I was very surprised. The first 20 minutes, I was like, oh, this is about the military-industrial complex. We're getting...
Yeah. And Israel-Palestine. I mean, James Gunn says it's not, but it's clearly about... It's clearly about kind of settler colonialism, if nothing else. And you don't see that a lot engaged in Hollywood in a serious way, right? It doesn't, unless you're under a serious, pressing political situation like we are with Israel-Gaza. You won't see that showing up because audiences are not going to flock to the theaters expecting that kind of thing. So how does dissent show up? I mean, do marchers in the street make the news? Would be one question to ask. And if they do, how do they appear? First, they don't show up. If they're completely unavoidable, if you can't ignore them, then the machine goes into high gear and characterizing them in very silly ways, like blowing off steam, being sort of fringe and crazy, as being a kind of like leftover from the 60s, as being ineffectual. So you get a kind of version of storytelling about dissent that suggests that it doesn't work and it's silly.
Moving back towards sort of the inner workings of the military entertainment complex,
okay.
Let's start with perhaps the most tangible and the most accessible and visible example of the complex in action, Pentagon collaboration with film and television productions. We can start here with a perspective that I can understand really well. Why might filmmakers be interested in collaborating with the Pentagon?
Well, it's corporate media production. So the easiest way to understand this is just to follow the money, right? It's cheaper. It's cheaper to work with the Pentagon, and you get more bang for your buck if you play ball. So somebody like Michael Bay, you can't assume that kind of filmmaker has a conscience and is doing things to make a statement of any kind, right? He wants to blow things up. And he will say, the reason I work with the military is because I can get really granular, gritty, realistic scenes that I cannot do with CGI. And he's got access to the best CGI on the planet, right? And it's a little cheaper. It's just a little cheaper to blow things up, with the military's help, instead of like making wooden mock-ups or even CGI, which tends to come off as a little bit antiseptic and lifeless, right? So if you've got real soldiers running around, real equipment, and it's kicking up dust, and the explosions are real, and you're blowing up, shells of old military vehicles, that's great, and that will give you, as a filmmaker, a better chance of surviving next year at the box office, and a better chance of making your next film. Right? If you keep your budget low and keep the audiences coming in, your receipts high. And so that, it's a basic economic calculation for most filmmakers until there's somebody telling them that this is a bad look. Right. And if that's in the water, and if people know that a film was made with the oversight and influence of a governmental organization, which is the most anti-American thing that most people can think of, right? Then they're going to come in there with some skepticism, probably not buy tickets, and there's going to be a lot of talk on the internet about that, which is why something like Top Gun Maverick has to head that off in advance.
Right.
So
they almost have to control the narrative by promoting it as a good thing before people can get their hands on it as a bad thing.
Yeah, Top Gun grabs the military people by the lapels and shoves them in front of the camera and talks about how great the relationship is before any of us can talk about it.
Right.
Of course, we don't know the details. we did a FOIA request on Top Gun Maverick, and they said they had 20,000 pages of stuff that they could not give us. They wanted something like $10,000 in order to Xerox it all. Otherwise, they wouldn't hand it over.
Was that did they send you 2,000 or 20,000 redacted pages? Was that, am I remembering that correctly?
They've sent us thousands of fully redacted pages in the past, but this was just a full-on denial of access to this stuff unless we paid. And even then, I'm not sure if they would. So there's a lot of material about that film that is under lock and key right now, and we're very eager to get it. And it has to do with the proximity to the release of the film. They don't want to damage their relationship with filmmakers. They don't want to damage the profit margins of this film by releasing this stuff. So they're holding off as long as possible. If they release the documentation, then they're going to get a reputation in Hollywood for doing that, and filmmakers won't approach them as much as they used to, and they'll lose their propaganda power.
Right. And one more thing to point out is that the authenticity point really doesn't make any sense. I mean, if you look at Top Gun, and even many of the creatives behind Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick have said, yeah, these types of things don't happen. There's countless scenes in this film that would just never happen.
Neil deGrasse Tyson points out one, the opening scene where he's it's like a Black Hawk type Lockheed, test plane, test jet. And he's going like Mach 9 or something like that. And then he bails out. And Neil deGrasse Tyson, a physicist, astrophysicist, he's like, he would have been like obliterated into a billion pieces if he would have done that. He's not going to land and then end up at a Waffle House, which is what happens in the film. He's not going to just parachute down from that. And, when they talk about authenticity, the former chief of the Entertainment Media Office, Phil Strub, he said straight up, and this is a very actually honest characterization of how they think about their word. We consider it inauthentic if it makes the military look bad, and that's almost a direct quotation.
Right. It seems, I wrote here that it seems that accuracy doesn't actually matter as long as the lies are entertaining and flattering. Mm-hmm. The Pentagon notes on the film Lone Survivor stated it very, very clearly. Support of entertainment feature films like this reach far greater audiences than any single news media story about the actual events. Audiences going to see the film will voluntarily sit through a 2-hour infomercial about the participation of Army Special Forces in one of our many joint missions. And then you have examples like Jarhead and Fields of Fire, things that were denied Pentagon assistance, may or may not have gone on to get made after that, depending on the case that you're looking at, despite being written by Marine veterans or written by veterans of the conflicts that the stories are about. And Fields of Fire is even the novel that the film was based off of, or was going to be based off of. That's one that didn't get produced. Is that right?
That's right. It wasn't produced because they denied it, and they didn't have the tools to make the movie, to produce the movie. So it wasn't made. Right.
Well, the book that it was based off of is required reading for Marine officers, and that's how accurate it's hailed to be. So that kind of discredits the accuracy or authenticity point that they argue. So say I'm a screenwriter interested in collaborating with the Pentagon on an upcoming project. When approaching my script, what would I most want to include, and what would I most want to exclude?
Oh, gosh. Well, this is the question of self-censorship, which happens in advance, right? If you know that it's going to be a submarine movie, you probably think, well, if this is going to be made, I'm going to have to please certain people that are going to give us the subs or whatever. And so self-censorship happens in advance with screenwriters. We know that because they talk about it. The kinds of things that you want to exclude are any internal criticisms of the military. So there's certain kind of hot button issues. Sexual assault in the military has been a huge one for a long time because they're trying to fill recruitment quotas. They're going after female recruits. There's a huge problem with rape and sexual assault, sexual harassment in the military. So don't make reference to that, especially critical reference to it. If you do it all, then it has to be a story about how a problem was solved by the military itself.
Very quickly and efficiently.
Quickly and efficiently. You can't talk about PTSD, suicide, drug, alcohol problems. of returning vets, and maybe along with that, how the VA is very spotty in terms of its record in handling that kind of thing or supporting people who struggle with it. So those are you can't talk about friendly fire, all the things that internally the military has to deal with and are sort of hot button issues. And then you can't really talk about anything that contravenes official U.S. foreign policy. So this is the kind of outward-facing stories. So you have to identify the right enemies, the right allies, the state of exceptionalism. It can't be critical of anything historical that the U.S. military has done. Can't talk about losing wars, war crimes, torture, all of that stuff, the things that people object to. You just can't have it in your script. They will get rid of it. I think the last one is a big one, and there are probably more that I'm forgetting. You can't talk about the nuclear arsenal. You can't talk about the bombing of Japan, the nuclear bombing of Japan in a critical way. You can't talk about nukes not being fully secure. Like if your movie is about a loose weapon being, captured by terrorists and used against the United States or something like that, they won't support that because they have to project the sense that our nuclear arsenal, which is huge, something like 20,000 warheads, is absolutely safe and that people should continue to support it and that it poses no risk.
The Godzilla example from Theaters of War definitely comes to mind there, but I don't know.
There's been huge interest in that analysis and those documents by Japanese media.
Really?
Yeah, I've gotten pings and visited by Japanese public television, Okinawa Times. They're really interested in the fact that the United States military intervened, especially in 2014, to change the nuclear story of Godzilla, kind of flip it on its head, and to absolve the United States of any kind of culpability in the bombing of Japan during World War II.
It's one of the clearest examples of how effective this is, even after the Pentagon is involved, because you talk in the documentary about how it was really only the first Godzilla movie that the Pentagon was involved with where they kind of changed the nuclear narrative, and then later films, if I'm recalling correctly, that didn't actually receive support, they still stuck with the narrative, and it still stuck with them.
Yeah, in 2019 they went with the same kind of general approach to nuclear weapons. And then now it's kind of drifting back to the original Godzilla narrative. So it's not permanent, but the DoD making one intervention, then, the story changes for the next decade or something like that.
Right. It's clear that the Pentagon's collaboration has an obvious financial benefit to studios, to filmmakers. We also know that the Media Affairs Office started rejecting more films in the post-Vietnam era as war was becoming a particularly contentious topic. Since studios are the ones in charge of determining what movies get made outside of independent film, where you don't generally see a lot of war movies, where does that leave filmmakers who wish to tell anti-war stories? What hoops do they have to jump through instead?
You have to get alternative sources of funding. You have to look for, if you want to do those kinds of representations, say in military vehicles, you have to, I'm thinking about this is a long time ago, but Platoon, and, as Top Gun is being made and as F-14 Tomcats are being given to Tony Scott and Jerry Bruckheimer, Oliver Stone has to go to the Philippines, which is, essentially a U.S. colony that receives a lot of U.S. weaponry, and get all the kind of Vietnam-era Huey helicopters from that government. Same thing with Apocalypse Now, which was, they tried to get support and they were rejected. And so you have to become really creative. You have to spend a lot more money, and you don't get the full suite of props. You have to make do with a lot less. Filmmakers who don't play ball and want to tell a critical story, even if, I wouldn't even consider Apocalypse Now or Platoon to be very critical at all. They tell a story about, there's murdering of civilians and rape in Platoon, but they don't talk about the justification for the war. Mm-hmm. They don't really zoom out to that degree, and
still very boots on the ground.
It is, yeah. And it's typical of war movies in general. they don't really engage the kind of geopolitical ethics of conflict or U.S. exceptionalism or anything like that. I mean, they could have said, we killed 2 to 4 million people in that war. It was a Holocaust, but, it's very limited, the critique. But you violate kind of the strictures of the DoD Entertainment Office, and you don't get the stuff, and you have to go to lengths to procure it.
Right. Who are some filmmakers, you've noted Jerry Bruckheimer, Michael Bay, who are some filmmakers and performers, if there are any more, that you could think of who have made Pentagon collaborations sort of a key staple of their filmography? And what is their broader function in the sphere of militainment? Because they sort of are straddling a weird line at that point between entertainers and government assets. You know what I mean? If you're Tom Cruise, if you're Jerry Bruckheimer, and you've had repeated military collaboration with your filmmaking work, I mean, to a degree, you're a propagandist as a career, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they've had their careers supported by repeat kind of frequent flyer trips with the DoD in those planes. Tom Cruise, I mean, the actor doesn't have as big of a role in deciding these things. I mean, they choose their roles. But Tom Cruise went from Top Gun to then, talking in Playboy magazine about how, he's not going to make a sequel ever because he doesn't want to start World War III. He said that. And then he goes on to make the sequel later. Yeah. But so he goes from Top Gun to the Playboy interview. And then, a couple of years later, he's working with Oliver Stone doing Born on the 4th of July, which I would consider to be a real critical film. I mean, that really dug deep. And so we're talking mostly about the producers and the directors here that really get the payoff from this kind of thing. And you mentioned a few. Jerry Bruckheimer and Michael Bay would be high on the list. A producer named Mace Neufeld, who did all of the, before he died recently, did all of the Jack Ryan movies. Oh. So starting with The Hunt for Red October and all the way through, Patriot Games and the Jack Ryan series he even had a part in before he died. Right. Those were all DoD collaborations, and most of them, I think all but the Hunt for Red October, involved the CIA as well. So those were full-on government productions, start to finish. I would also throw Peter Berg into this camp. He didn't really strike pay dirt until Lone Survivor, but he did a couple of DoD adjacent productions that had help, and then he went on and he was doing production for military appearances on NFL games at the Super Bowl, and he's done a series of TV productions involving military equipment, so stuff for the Discovery Channel where they look at super weapons. Peter Berg is involved in that kind of stuff. So he's staked a lot of his career on that as well. We've talked a lot, and this is like a Pandora's box, but we've talked a lot about the Pentagon, but not too terribly much about the CIA. The truth is that much of what can be said about one can also be said about the other. The CIA's office is modeled after the Pentagon's Media Affairs Office, functions much in the same way. What makes the CIA different, though, in terms of their bargaining power, what they bring to the table for studios and for filmmakers? Good question. And thank you, appreciate it. And in terms of secretiveness too, because it's very difficult to find information about CIA collaboration compared to Pentagon. Yeah, they're much more secretive, and it's much more difficult to pry the documents out of their hands. The CIA doesn't have a lot of assets. I mean, they increasingly they have drones. They've got helicopters. They've got the CIA headquarters, which is this branded thing that everybody, the spy walking over the CIA seal in the lobby at Langley. I mean, that's an image everybody knows. So they've got that. But what they really have is not assets like the DoD. They've got storytelling power. So they've got intelligence, right? They understand the geopolitical situation. They've gamed out all kinds of scenarios, and they take those scenarios to producers, and they become the basis for various scripts. So, the Jack Ryan series would be a great example of this, right? They identified threats of different kinds that are interesting and plausible and hypothetical, and they make for great treatments and scripts. And so they'll sell this capability to filmmakers at the beginning stages. So Hollywood needs ideas. You can go to the CIA and they will pitch you an idea. But in return, they're going to ask that you play ball with them and give them script oversight capabilities and tell a story that they want to tell about their organization. You're right. They went online with their entertainment office pretty late in the game, 1996. This was after the fall of the Berlin Wall. People thought maybe the CIA was going to get phased out because it's a Cold War relic and they had to make themselves relevant again. So, injecting themselves rather than hiding from Hollywood and hiding from media depictions, injecting themselves into those depictions in a really deliberate and forward-facing way was the goal of that office, and they did a great job of it. I mean, the CIA was a dirty word from 1973 forward. And now, it's a sexy thing. I mean, I know students of mine that want to join the CIA. That would not have been the case 20 years ago.
Right. While these relationships aren't technically secret, they certainly aren't something the Pentagon or CIA want you knowing about. In fact, this assistance often goes uncredited, which is a pretty clear indicator of intent to hide or mask its existence. So how is it then that we've come to know as much as we do about as many film projects as we do?
Oh, this is a story of accessibility. Who has access to this information? Well, for one, we've known about the existence of the office, and we know, even without any of the documents, that Phil Straub, who ran the entertainment office for about 30 years, from the 80s to 2018, he's the most credited person in Hollywood history.
Phil Straub.
Phil Straub is the most credited person in Hollywood history. He shows up in the most credit roles. And so there's you could call that a kind of transparency. You could. But that's all we knew for the longest time about these operations.
How would he be credited? How would he have been credited on those productions?
Special thanks. Special thanks to the DOD and Phil Straub at the entertainment office. Yeah.
Right.
And so, they still do that to some degree, but they're a little bit more gun shy about it, especially as word of this kind of leaks out. And there are more stories about it, including this one. So there's been a kind of transparency. There's also been a kind of transparency in the academic sense. There was a guy named Lawrence Seward who wrote a book called Guts and Glory that was supposedly the definitive history of this relationship. And he got access to all the documents and wouldn't give them to anybody else who asked. And so he had a special relationship with the DOD, and we found out he was employed directly and actually paid at several points by the DOD. And the book reflects this very cozy relationship. It's not until 2004 when we get a real critical treatment, this book called Operation Hollywood by a guy named David Robb, who was worked for the Hollywood Reporter and for Variety magazine. He gets his hands on a lot of the documents and is able to tell the first draft of that history. And then since then, I mean, he probably had 5,000 or 6,000 pages on about 100 films.
Lawrence Seward, part of Theaters of War is, I remember, I watched that. I watched that first. That I watched before my original group project presentation that I did here in Grady, and it was a group project and during finals season, so I didn't get very in depth or do as much as I would like. But I came back to it. But I just remember watching that in my dorm room, the Lawrence Seward part.
The research part, I think it's the most boring part of the movie, but
really? I mean,
some people really get into that section.
I mean, just seeing him in the Rolodex and like each of those, as each of those reveals came out, the reveal that he's essentially an asset, yes. an employee.
Yeah, he's basically Michael Bay of academe.
Right. I mean, that was incredible. I wrote here that it sounds like Seward's relationship with the Pentagon was very similar to the relationship that a filmmaker might have, who's collaborating with them. So
yeah,
that's just
instead of F-14s, he gets all the documents.
Right.
He tells the story.
So we've brushed the surface of this, but what do you think are the dangers of a lack of disclosure in these types of collaboration? And why do you think it's unlikely that we will ever get disclosure, ever get so much as a splash screen before the film saying this film was made with Department of Defense collaboration? That seems to me, and it seems like to you, an unlikely outcome. Why would you say that is?
Is it likely? I hope it happens, and I was hoping the film would make a big enough splash that it put that on the agenda, and that people start to think about that, because it's an easy move to make, and it wouldn't take much. I mean, Ted Cruz decided pretty recently that he would sponsor legislation that would prohibit filmmakers who had bowed to the Chinese market and the Chinese government in making a film, that they wouldn't lose access to U.S. assets. So if that kind of legislation could go through, I mean, it's sort of like, fighting a Cold War through film. If that kind of legislation can go through, then it seems plausible that, there's at least a chance that there could be some kind of notice, legislation that would support a notice at the beginning of films that would alert us all to the influence in any particular production. But yeah, at this point, it does seem kind of less likely, because the film has gone through a cycle, and I can't seem to get it on Netflix. So, I mean, it's played very well in Europe. It's on public television in about 7 European countries and Australia, but not in the U.S. And the danger of that is we just sleepwalk through history, right? We lose our ability to think critically about U.S. military action. That history is whitewashed. We can't think critically about it. It doesn't show up in our most powerful medium, and that's not news, and that's not the history books. It is feature film. That's how we remember conflict, and that's World War II is Saving Private Ryan in our heads. I mean, that's where it lives. And to the extent that those critical questions are not getting into our entertainment diet is the extent to which we are going to repeat the mistakes of history. We are going to lose our ability to hold powerful people accountable for misusing the military over and over again. And we'll end up accepting wholesale the story that is being sold to us, which is that we don't torture, we don't kill civilians, our nuclear arsenal is safe, there's no internal problems with the military. Our purpose in the world is to get into the business of everybody else and bomb whoever we want at any time of day, right? If that story is accepted, then the American public loses the most powerful thing that we have at our disposal, which is the ability to call the shots, the ability to authorize conflict. We'll just abdicate that, and we'll be like any other dictatorship that doesn't need to ask for permission. So if we cultivate a critical kind of media diet, which we can do if we're aware that this influence is happening, even if we don't have the splash screen at the beginning of the movie, if people simply know that this is a possibility, then that is a kind of radical break with the official story right there even. And then that creates space for asking critical questions, the kinds of questions we need to ask if we're not going to turn the world into a parking lot, if the world is not going to turn the U.S. into a parking lot.
Right.
One of our interviewees, Matt Alford, he's at the University of Bath in the UK. He works with his collaborator. And I wanted to have outtakes in the film, but I just decided to get rid of them. But one of them was from an interview he did. He said, after all the nukes have been dropped, after we lose control and we've had this exchange, after the world has turned into a glass parking lot, there's still going to be a few movie theaters emptied out of patrons, and there's going to be one very sad rerun of Transformers running over and over again while everybody endures nuclear winter. It's a dark joke. It's a dark joke. But it's like, how far can we push this? How far can we scrub history and lose touch with our sacred duty, which is to make sure that the military is not misused by corporate power. If we lose touch with that, then the powers that be are just going to take those liberties, and we're going to pay the price. And maybe that scenario isn't too far from us, because losing control of our nuclear arsenal is not just a hypothetical. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists have the doomsday clock at 3 minutes to midnight now. We better keep a close eye on that, and our media environment ought to remind us to do that.
In your documentary, Theaters of War, you note that the Freedom of Information Act requests had begun coming back after longer and longer gaps with more and more redacted portions. In the time since then, has your luck with FOIA changed very much? Has it gotten better or worse?
Well, the Entertainment Media Office has changed its name to the Community Engagement Office.
Oh, wow.
And they've changed their name a few times over the few years, but you have to go all the way back to the 1980s, really, to get the last name change. And I think they're doing that in response to the public conversation. They want to hide again. And so they're changing their name. And they're also doing their best to withhold documents. So, I mean, it's been a pretty shocking switch in strategy. We would ask for the typical suite of things, which is like script notes, weekly activity reports, the scripts themselves, any kind of internal correspondence with filmmakers and whatnot. And now the only thing, we used to get back everything, but now in a typical FOIA request, the only thing that they'll give us is what's called the Production Assistance Agreement, which is a contract between the filmmakers and the DoD. And that has very little information about what kinds of negotiations, especially over script content, that were made, and it essentially tells us only that there was collaboration and nothing else. So that's the kind of response that we're getting. So it's a blackout again, and I think they know that they're under threat and they're trying to do damage control.
Right. The obvious elephant in the room with regards to the future of any and all things American is the current Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump. Forgive my overly broad question. What do you see changing in the world of militainment under his administration, and whether that's precedent you saw in the first one that you would expect to continue in this administration or things you've seen evolving in this administration? Have there been any noteworthy changes?
Donald Trump campaigned as an anti-war candidate. We're going to get out all these losing wars, and we're going to maintain the integrity of our military institutions. We're going to take care of the veterans and the soldiers, et cetera. And he's done just the opposite. So in his first term, he ramped up the drone war by 5 times what Obama was doing. And Obama was already he was bombing every day. And then Trump, threatens to, completely flatten Gaza. Completely empty it out. He almost gets us into a nuclear conflict by threatening North Korea. He's done all kinds of horrible things. But the impulse among his constituency was a sort of like isolationist anti-war impulse. And I think that was healthy given the track record of the United States up until that point. And he tapped into that because it's real and it's there, especially among the people that were returning from these conflicts that were very critical of what was happening in Afghanistan and Iraq. He tapped into that. And I think the potential is there for people to be more skeptical of government propaganda and government propaganda specifically in the entertainment industries. The potential is there. But we have seen that Donald Trump has completely reneged on all those promises and has become a very, bellicose, exceptionalist president who's, bombing as much as his predecessors. And so, the U.S. war machine marches on. It does, and it's unabated. But there was a moment, there's a window there where I think I don't have a lot of flattering things to say about the Trump presidency, but that was one silver lining.
General anti-war sentiment that it was fueled by.
Yeah. And it's gone. It's evaporated.
Right. We are unlikely to get disclosure like we talked about, but could there be a legal basis for abolishing these media offices at the Pentagon and at the CIA?
There could be. We have anti-propaganda laws on the books, and these were added to almost every single piece of legislation since the 1960s forward, except for defense appropriations. You'll see at the end of almost every bill that Congress passes, none of these funds can be used for petitioning the public for propaganda purposes, for getting more funds, for example, for lobbying. And yet this is what the DoD is doing. It's funneling funds into a public relations organization that's designed to influence public opinion and procure more money next time in large and this already engorged DoD budget. And it wasn't until recently that that started to get tagged on the defense appropriations bills. So it's technically illegal for them to be engaging in public relations activities beyond recruitment. It's technically illegal, and that includes anything that they do in Hollywood and TV. There's also laws on the books like the Smith-Mundt Act from the early Cold War period and all its iterations since then that prohibits the U.S. government from propagandizing domestic populations. And so there's an infrastructure there. I need lawyers. So if any lawyers are listening, want to do some pro bono work on this to challenge this in court, that has yet to be done.
Yeah. So what can we do as citizens to sort of reclaim our deliberative role on the military front and fight against propaganda?
Demand the documents. I think that would be the first thing. Demand that they acknowledge when they've had influence over a film. And that's got to be on the film itself. That's got to be up front and center next to the FBI warning. What you're about to see has been influenced by the CIA, Department of Homeland Security, DoD, whatever agency it happens to be. We need transparency, and that's the simplest form. But then, of course, the other piece is we need the details about this. We need public access, because just knowing that the DoD worked on a film doesn't tell us much at all, except maybe to engage in conjecture about what they might have done. And I think the third thing is, pressuring filmmakers themselves. I mean, we vote with our wallets every time we walk into a movie theater or subscribe to Netflix and watch something. And if filmmakers know that if the public suspects that they did business with the DoD, if that they're a propaganda poster movie, they're going to stop doing that because it's not going to make economic sense. And so putting pressure on filmmakers too is something we can do.
Mm-hmm. So is there anything you'd like to let everyone listening know before we wrap this up? Books, documentaries to plug?
Well, I guess I'd plug it's maybe a year or a year and a half out, but I made the documentary film first, and then we're combing through all the documents. It takes a long time to tell the story, hopefully under 700 pages. It's going to be a thick book. But there's a lot to say about the history of this relationship and really going into the details of specific films and narratives that have been crafted. I mean, right now I'm writing an academic article about nuclear cinema, essentially the treatment of nuclear weaponry, not just the bombing of Japan at the end of World War II, but how loose nukes and the nuclear arsenal have been treated in Hollywood cinema, and how the DoD has influenced that story along the way. And you can do that with 20 different themes that the DoD seems to care about, and that's going to be the kind of bread and butter of the book. So that I'm probably going to call it Theaters of War as well, just to keep the brand alive. Right. keep that narrative thread going. But that'll be in about a year and a half, 2 years out.
Okay. I look forward to that. Dr. Roger Stahl, thank you so much for being here today. It's been an honor to speak with you about this.
Thank you. It has been a great joy to witness all the research that you've done in advance and all the thought you put into these questions. So I appreciate that.
Thank you to Dr. Roger Stahl for joining me, and thanks to you, the listener, for tuning in. I'm new to the whole podcasting thing, so hopefully this was interesting for you guys. I'll see you in the next episode, and until then, stay skeptical and always make sure you're getting the full picture.